The land stretched wide and endless beneath the burning colors of dusk, the prairie grass bowing to a restless wind that whispered secrets older than the mountains, and in that fading light, where the shadows of tall cottonwoods reached across the trail like long fingers, two small figures stumbled forward, their tiny hands locked together as if their very survival depended upon it, which in truth it did, for these were no ordinary wanderers but twins, brother and sister. No more than 7 winters old, their moccasins torn, their faces streaked with dust and dried tears, and yet in their eyes there flickered a determination far too fierce for their years, a stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished no matter how cruel the world had shown itself to be, and as they pressed on, each step heavier than the last, their gazes lifted toward the silhouette that loomed ahead in the dying glow of the sun, a silhouette so imposing, so otherworldly in stature, that even the earth itself seemed to hesitate beneath its weight, for there before them stood the giant woman, a figure wrapped in legend and fear, whispered about in both campfire tales and hushed warnings, a woman whose height and breadth dwarfed the tallest of men, whose strength was said to rival that of oxen and bears, whose silence was heavier than gunfire, and whose solitude was so complete that most who passed through these parts did so with wide eyes and quickened steps, unwilling to tempt fate by crossing her path. Yet here she was, rising out of the prairie dusk like some forgotten deity of the wilderness, her storm-gray eyes narrowed as she regarded the 2 frail children who dared approach her, her massive arms hanging at her sides like the trunks of oak trees, her skin weathered by years of wind and hardship, and her presence both terrifying and strangely protective, as if she belonged not to the world of ordinary folk but to the bones of the land itself, and though every instinct in the twins told them to tremble and flee, they held their ground, for desperation has a way of silencing fear, and the boy, clutching his sister's hand until his knuckles blanched, drew in a shaky breath and spoke, his voice trembling but laced with a courage that seemed far too large for his small frame. "Please. Please, you have to help us," he said, the words catching in his throat as though they weighed more than the stones scattered along the trail, and his sister, eyes wide and shimmering with tears she refused to shed, nodded beside him, her tiny chin lifting with a bravery that came only from love, and she added in a voice softer than the wind itself, "They've taken our people, they've taken our mother. We don't know where else to go, and they say you're the only one strong enough to stop them," and as the plea hung in the air between them, fragile as a spider's web and yet unbreakable in its truth, the giant woman did not move, did not speak, but merely stared, her shadow engulfing them as if to test their resolve, and in that silence the children felt the weight of ages, the gravity of a choice that could change not only their fates but perhaps the course of many lives, for the giant woman was not one who lent her strength easily, not anymore, not since the days when she had wielded it in battles that had left scars not just upon her body but upon her spirit, scars unseen yet deeper than any wound of flesh, scars that had driven her into the wilds, away from the noise of tribes and settlers alike, away from blood and fire and betrayal, and into the solitude where only the whisper of wind and the cry of hawks could reach her, and though her silence stretched long enough that the twins feared their hope had been misplaced, something in their eyes pierced the armor she had so carefully forged, something in the way their tiny bodies trembled yet did not yield, in the way their voices shook yet did not falter, in the way their hearts, though small, beat with the raw courage of desperation, reminded her of a truth she had buried long ago, that strength, true strength, was not meant to be hidden but to be used to protect those who could not protect themselves, and with a sigh that rumbled like thunder rolling over distant hills, she bent one knee and lowered herself until her enormous frame seemed almost human in scale, her gaze meeting theirs not from above but at their level, her hand, so massive it could crush stone, reaching out, not in menace but in an almost tender stillness, and as her fingertips brushed the children's shoulders, careful, feather-light despite their size, the boy felt a warmth surge through him, not of fire but of safety, and the girl's tears, long held back, spilled freely as if she had finally found a harbor, and then, with a deep voice that resonated like the earth itself speaking, the giant woman said but 2 words, "Show me," and in that moment, as the last light of day gave way to the shroud of night, as coyotes cried in the distance and the first stars pierced the darkening sky, a storm that had been long dormant began to stir, not in the heavens, but in the heart of the woman who had sworn never again to walk the path of battle, for now, with two fragile hands guiding her, she rose once more, taller than the night, heavier than the silence, and began to follow them toward the ruins of a world she had once turned her back upon.